Magaret Brennan is traveling with the president in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. Magaret, we know Secretary Tillerson addressed several of these new arms deals. We know President Obama also had provided an arms deal with Saudi Arabia. How are they different, Magaret, and what can you tell us about this deal?
Well, Saudi Arabia is and always has been the largest purchaser of weapons when it comes to American-made arms, both during the Obama and during the Trump administration. This package, though, is really seen as symbolic of the Trump administration trying to repair a relationship that was badly damaged during the Obama era because of that outreach to Iran to broker the nuclear deal, but also the Obama administration not more strongly backing Egypt's then embattled president back during the Arab Spring, and then also not taking action in Syria. So there's a lot of frustration here in the kingdom, and you saw the absolute opposite of that today. This was a warm welcome even before any of these deals had been announced, as soon as President Trump stepped off that plane. And then from Secretary Tillerson, we heard him lay out the justification for that really significant $110 billion arms package, saying that this is about building up security here against the threat from Iran. The repeated reference to Iran really part of that, drawing that distinction between the Trump and the Obama administration. And you also heard Rex Tillerson justify this in terms of helping to build up the pushback against any kind of terror threat, whether it's through weaponry or whether it's through social media, really trying to, in many ways, renew a relationship that during the campaign, then candidate Trump perhaps damaged when speaking about Islam being an enemy, speaking about a potential Muslim ban. Now, as president, he is reaching out to Saudi Arabia, which is the birthplace of Islam. And as you hear repeatedly them refer to this as a custodian of the two holy mosques, the reason they're doing that is to really show that the President Trump is rebuilding any kind of frayed relations that might have been incurred during that campaign.
And Magaret, when you talk about frayed relations, they also address the fighting in Syria and in Yemen and putting the pressure on Iran, a country that had elections today. So as they strengthen this alliance with Saudi Arabia, what do you think it means for Iran, Magaret?
Well, it's not clear. We actually got some really interesting news from Secretary Tillerson during that brief press availability he had. He said he wouldn't hang up the phone. He'd take a call from Iran's foreign minister. He'd speak with them, and says he likely will do that in the future. That's the first time we've heard the Trump administration say that diplomacy with Iran is an option here. Up to this point, they've really emphasized this hardline approach of pushing back militarily against the terror groups that are backed by Iran, Hezbollah and others, as well as on the battlefield in places like, as you heard the Saudi foreign minister point out, even in Afghanistan, where U.S. troops are on the ground, that they are alleging Iran is behind some meddling there. So that was really interesting to have Secretary Tillerson say, well, there may be some room for diplomacy as we continue to review whether or not to stick by this nuclear deal negotiated in the Obama era that the Trump administration has inherited. So they have to come to a final agreement if they're going to honor it or not. That was really interesting. In terms of what you heard about that arms package, a lot of that also has to do with the war in Yemen and Iran's influence there. Iran has been supporting through arms and through some political support a group of rebels that has been embattled in a war, having overthrown the government in Yemen, which Saudi Arabia feels very threatened by because of their shared border. So this continued provision of weaponry, and specifically precision-guided munitions, is really supposed to help them. And Saudi Arabia sees this as really strengthening their hand against Iran, because that's the prism through which they view this war in Yemen, which is also more complicated because it's a civil war, and the U.S. is trying to get them back to the negotiating table. So that's how Secretary Tillerson justified this and really sort of tried to connect those dots in saying that the weapons are going to help us get to diplomacy.
Yeah, definitely a fascinating deal that they struck there. Magaret, I want to ask you about the president. He's also giving a speech. What do we expect him to say?
Well, President Trump will deliver that speech tomorrow, and this is really his sort of coming out party to the Arab and Muslim world. He will not only meet with the Saudi king as he did today, but he'll meet with a number of leaders of Arab and Muslim majority countries, more than 30 from what we have heard. We don't have the exact list of who he's going to chat with and shake hands with, but you can expect him to speak to Egypt's President Sisi, others who he has really tried to welcome with open arms. So this is President Trump saying, now that I'm in office, I view things perhaps a bit differently. I don't view Islam as the enemy. He's going to try to show that he understands the distinction between the kind of radical extremism that he has been, full-throated in his pledge to fight versus allying closely with Muslim countries who are battling these terror groups themselves, Saudi Arabia being one of them.
Our Magaret Brennan traveling with the president in Saudi Arabia. Margaret, thank you.